Hello and welcome to Post Point, a podcast where we here at the Puyallup Post discuss topics in today's world. My name is Steven Gonzalez. I'm the editor-in-chief.
My name is Ash Polk-Wheelock, and I am the graphic designer.
And my name's Kiera Anderson. I'm a photojournalist.
I'm Victor Filion, and I'm the videographer.
Today we're going to be talking about video games. Do they lead to desensitized kids and fiends and murderers and all the things the media believes? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah, same. I don't think, no.
Okay, doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of dissent here. That's a little uninteresting. I'm going to say they do. No, I'm just kidding. So for starters, we're going to talk a little bit about video games in general for anyone listening that hasn't played video games. And if you haven't, I'm very sorry for you. So right at the budding 70s in 1971, the first arcade game was released. Around 72, we got the first console game in Magna Varus. It wasn't until around 76 that the first quote-unquote bad game came out in Death Race. It had a lot of depictions of murder and violence that people were worried about. 1983, we got Custer's Revenge on the NES. This is kind of funny for me because my mom had this game for us when we were a kid because my mom raised 4 kids, and so she just bought games for us, you know? She didn't have time to be like, is this game good for my kids? Does anybody here know what Custer's Revenge is?
No.
It's a game
Not dinosaurs.
where you are Colonel Custer, and there's a Native American woman tied to a tree, and you have to dodge arrows. You're both naked, mind you. You have to dodge arrows, get to her, so you can rape her and continue to the next level.
Wait, what?
And this game has the Nintendo seal of approval on it.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it is insane.
Can you still play it?
Yeah.
That's horrible.
It is insane. It is a game. Anyway, 1993, somehow Custer's Revenge snuck past a lot of people, but 1993 is when everyone came together because Night Trap came out and Mortal Kombat came out, and people were like, games are getting spooky. We need to handle this. And the ESRB rating system came together, and our lives were never the same. So let's talk a bit about video games in general, our thoughts on violence in video games. Do they have a place? Do they not have a place? Maybe we can talk about some of the games we mentioned. Maybe you guys want to talk about Custer's Revenge. It's a good game. I beat it, but
Oh my god.
funny because when you're a kid, you don't pay attention to these things and you don't know what's going on. But it wasn't until way later in a video I watched that was like top 10 offensive games that I saw this game was on the list, and I was like, what's the problem? I was like, oh, that is what's happening. That is his. Okay, yeah, that is a problem. Because you don't. It's like 8-bit graphics when you're a kid. You don't really know what's going on, and yeah, that was a bit much. Anyway, I'm gonna open the floor to you guys. Your thoughts on violence in video games? Go.
I personally don't think that it necessarily affects people's behavior, but at the same time, it's just like whenever situations happen and media blames video games for them doing what they did, I just feel like you're pulling out like a tiny fragment of the entire situation and blowing it out of proportion, really. When Columbine happened, media blamed Marilyn Manson because he was just doing all these he was more of an out there kind of musician. So they blamed him for the school shooting. It seems a little ridiculous that you would blame the music that the person listened to for being their motive of whatever they did.
My opinion on that is that basically we blame the media and stuff, but I think if anything, because it is such a small proportion, like maybe it does empower certain people, but they're already like predisposed to this violence. Before we had violent video games, we had physical people would fight like for entertainment, and people would go to like stadiums and like watch people fight, and so violence has always been a part of our culture as entertainment. And so I don't think that the introduction of digital media that does the same thing has changed that at all.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I've kind of stated something like this previously, but I think that it's something that could definitely be restated. I think that as soon as there's an issue, we want to place blame on something, and it's a lot easier to place blame on something that can't defend itself, such as a video game, versus a person. So I think that it's a lot easier to blame a video game than it is to blame a person.
Or society.
So a lot of these games are a lot older than you guys, but surely everyone here has played Mortal Kombat before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did your parents allow you to play games like that when you were a kid?
I don't remember there being any sort of discussion of whether or not I was allowed to play certain video games, mainly because it wasn't me who played the video games, but like cousins. So I would go to like cousins' houses and you'd play the video games, but I was more of an outdoor like crafts kid. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember there being some sort of rule.
Definitely growing up for me, it was never an issue, like what kind of media I consumed. Like obviously my mom would make sure that something wasn't completely out there, but she was much more of the idea of like, this stuff exists and I would rather expose my kid to it than like shelter them, and then they go off into the world and it's like, oh, bad things happen, what? So it was never a thing for me where she was like, you couldn't play this game. But growing up, I didn't really gravitate towards more violent games. I was definitely more of like a Mario Kart and Nintendogs kind of person.
For me, it was kind of a yes and a no in the sense that my mom was kind of religious, so she didn't necessarily want me to play like Call of Duty or like Grand Theft Auto and stuff, but my dad didn't care. And yeah, so I was always able to, but there were certain things that I could and could not play when my mom got home. But that ended quickly, like pretty much around like 3rd or 4th grade. But before that, because I've been playing video games practically my entire life, but so pretty much from then to 3rd grade, I was there was kind of a filter there, but not necessarily something that like I couldn't play at all.
So yeah, like my filter came oddly later in life. Like you just said, Vic, video games have been a part of my life. There's this joke that I'm obsessed with them because when I was a kid, they dropped me on an NES system because, you know, hooray for great siblings. But my mom, like I mentioned with Custer's Revenge, she never had the time really to be there and be that parent to be like, oh, you can't be playing this, you can't be playing that. So I played all the games growing up, whatever I wanted to. Sometimes that was Mario Kart, sometimes that was Mortal Kombat, sometimes that was Grand Theft Auto. But there came a day when my best friend got God of War, and at that point I was like 12, 13. I was getting up in the years as far as adolescence goes. And that point was when she decided, she was like, no, you can't play this game. I'll let you dismember people in Mortal Kombat. You can pay prostitutes to have sex in Grand Theft Auto. But this right here, Greek philosophy, none of that. And so I was like, where do we draw the line? And I guess that was her last-ditch effort, because like 2 years later, that was gone. So it's funny how parents just kind of chime in at random points. And they're like, you can't play this one, though. And it's like, that's a weird line to draw, but okay.
What was it about that game, do you think?
See, that's the thing. Like, I didn't even get to play it for that long. Like, I don't know if anyone here's played it, but I was in the first level. Like, I was just hacking something apart. And she just came in and she was like, not this. None of this. And I was just like,
Yeah, wait.
mind you, the game is bad. Like, because then I would just go to my best friend's house and he would play it and I would watch him play it. But, like, you can have sex with people in that game and you can do a lot of gratuitous things. But she didn't see any of that. So she came in, saw me just attack something, and she was like, no. But I was like, I've done worse in Mortal Kombat, so.
I wonder if she actually did her research somehow on that specific game and then was like, oh, Steven can't do this.
Maybe she heard it.
But
through,
then
like,
didn't
friends.
think
I
to
don't-
check
I don't
any
think,
others.
the internet was around when Steven
Well,
was a kid.
yeah, but
God of
from-
War isn't that old of a game. I mean, also, yes, the internet was around when I was a kid. You just couldn't be on the phone and be on it at the same time.
Well, and I'm not even necessarily saying that like she did research, like went on the computer, but talked to, like Kiki said, another parent or something.
Oh, my mom doesn't have friends. No, I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
okay.
I'm just kidding. I know you listen to this, Mom. So kind of the face behind the ESRB rating system, which in case anybody doesn't know, again, in which case, go play a video game in your life. But the ESRB rating system determines what age you have to be to play what game. So for a lot of us growing up, everything was good until it got to like T for teen. And then if it was M for mature, that was it. Like you just couldn't access that. And the two big people behind that I find interesting. They're both Democratic senators, Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl. It's funny because when we talk about this war on video games, video games are damaging our youth and they're going to poison the next generation. It sounds, when it's in the news anyway, it's portrayed in a way that it's like this is an issue we all agree on. But the initial appeal came from the Democrat side. Anybody surprised by that? Any thoughts on that? Because when I think of video game violence, to me, usually it gets juxtaposed by the religious aspect behind it. But usually religion tends to be more of a conservative value.
Yeah, I don't know if that necessarily surprises me though. But I don't have any particular reasoning. But that's not incredibly surprising. I definitely would, in my mind, stereotype it as something that came from, Republican value and interesting.
I don't know. I think it's not necessarily surprising to me or anything like that, but I do think like it being there is important because I think there should be some type of way you can whether or not you want to have your child exposed to that or not, and same thing goes for films as well. Although I think I don't know how much goes into like determining what game gets what rating and whatnot, but I know for film there's like a distinct like breakdown of like, oh, for PG-13 you can use one F-bomb, you can have sexual content in it with no nudity, things like that.
Well, isn't there also crazy ones like you can have nudity, but it can only be like under a certain amount of seconds?
Yeah, it's
like somebody can't
weird...
just pause the movie, like. Yeah, I definitely believe that there is a place for these types of ratings, but I also kind of believe that sometimes they can be kind of strict. Like Vic brought up with the movies, it's like I don't understand how the difference between like one F-bomb in a movie and two like makes the jump from PG-13 to rated R. Like to me that just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a little surprised you're both so firmly footed on the ESRB rating system. I've always hated it as a kid, and I mean, as a kid, it was a simple decision of I just want to play what I want to play. But as an adult, I think much like our rating systems in films, I can understand in the instance that it's important to not expose kids to these things, but I think that's what parenting's for.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what that does is that it hampers creative content. Because I can think of not so much video games, but since we've already made the comparison, I can think of plenty of movies that have suffered because of their R rating or something, because they lost a good chunk of their audience because kids aren't allowed to go see this now, and vice versa. I can think of movies like we recently saw Venom, and we talked about how that probably would have been a little better if it went the full rated R rating, but that would have like pulled away from some of the audience. So when you think of video games, and if a video game gets an M rating, that's a huge, only adults can play that. And at least back when the ESRB rating first came about, not a lot of adults were playing video games. That was kind of a kid's world. So any game that came out back in the day and got an M rating might as well have been a death sentence to that game.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not defending it and saying that I'm firmly footed in it. I'm just saying I definitely believe that there is a place for these types of ratings, but my point was basically that I feel like they are too strict. And like you said, do stifle creativity. It was the same thing, with Deadpool, where there was a lot of fear before the movie came out of like, are they going to try and make this PG-13 and basically ruin the character and the story? But then they went rated R with it, and it was awesome. And I feel like you can apply that same kind of logic to video games.
Mm-hmm. Another comment that I kind of wanted to make was, I'm not exactly sure if this is true or not, but like, if you're going to a rated R movie, as long as you have someone who's 18 with you, you can still go with them, right?
No.
You can't?
Vic would be the expert on this. Vic, tell the listeners about.
So, for rated R, with if you're a minor, so 16 and under, actually it's the age of 7 to 16. You have to be accompanied by someone who is at least 21 years old. Anyone who is 6 years old or under cannot attend any rated R film. So, like, if you were a mother and you had your baby with you, you would not be able to bring your child with you. What's it called? And then there's also, if you're 17 and up, you just have to provide identification to prove that you are of that age. But, I mean, yeah, as it's actually a law, so as someone who works at a movie theater, we can get, like, in legal trouble if we don't abide by those. So I honestly, I don't know. I actually really love doing that. Like, especially going back to the rating system. Yes, there are films like Venom, for example. They had to bring it down to PG-13 to just get more ticket sales. But at the same time, studios do those things where they make like a horror movie for $2, throw it out there. They know it's going to make its money back because it's going to be a PG-13 horror film, and a bunch of teens are going to go see it. There's also those. But then there's also horror films that are rated R. Like recently, there was The Nun. And I watched The Nun, and there's not a lot in there that I could see being the reason for it having an R rating, but there was a bunch of teens that came to try to see it, and we had to deny them access due to the fact that they weren't 17 or they just didn't have identification. Because that is also a big thing. If you're, let's say, Kiki, say you came to my work and you wanted to go see a movie. Yeah, I know you, but if you didn't have your ID and you wanted to see a rated R movie, I would be like, I'm sorry.
I like that we had this opportunity to put you in your element and got to hear about movies and stuff. Okay, so let's move on a bit and get into something that's a bit more of a serious topic, and we're going to talk about just kind of a lot of the murders, the shootings, the deaths we've had in our country and how they've been associated with video games. There's honestly so many that we wouldn't do it justice focusing on it, so I'm just going to talk about 2 in general, and we're gonna kind of, go on about it. Adam Lanza is one of the 2 behind the Sandy Hook shootings in Sandy Hook Elementary, and at least in the news, it was depicted in a way that he played a lot of violent computer games, and that's what led to what happened. Another one, James Holmes, The Dark Knight Rises, the one that shot up a movie theater. They said that he played a lot of violent video games like World of Warcraft. And
Movies was also
World of Warcraft as a violent video game. I grew up watching my father play WoW. Like, what?
Well, keep an eye on your dad, because it's just a matter of time.
Oh my god.
I think it's ludicrous to claim that someone's like action X comes from action Y. There's no correlation between the two.
And there's no way to prove that. Like, just because somebody plays a video game, there are so many other factors at play there.
Yeah, we've had plenty of studies in the past that ever since this started in the 70s and people started taking notice about the violence of video games, people have been looking for a way to deal with it and just be like, we can't do it because of this. This is the reason why video games lead to violence. And they can't find it because you can't draw that line. It's so hard to make that correlation, because if Vic goes out tomorrow and shoots up a school, and that we can link that and say that it was because of his playing video games. We can legitimately link it. Like, he has a little manifesto that says, I played this game a lot and it gave me this idea, and because of that I did this. Well, that's an isolated incident. Even if all of the lines were there, we would still only be able to say that worked for Vic. But then if I do the same thing and I don't have that, how can we say that there's a correlation there?
And still, millions of people play video games, and millions of people are running out and committing these crimes. So, there's always going to be an outlier there. And so even if one person doesn't mean that it is something inherently wrong with the game itself. Also, video games are released worldwide, and we have these issues predominantly in the United States.
Also, another thing, kind of going off of Steven's idea, is media attaches these crimes and their motivation for doing them to video games. But in everybody's life, everyone ends up doing some type of, whether it be small or big, some type of, violent act, something that, maybe, especially, when you're a little kid, you, play fight in the backyard or something. And if you get in trouble for that, theoretically, you can throw the whole claim that, video games made him violent to any type of scenario that has any bit to do with, any type of violent thing.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Vic, is a very important note, that I think it's in human nature to have acts of violence. I think we're a violent species. I think part of what separates us from animals is knowing how to mitigate that, but I think it's asinine to look at someone that commits a violent act and be like, it's simply because of this. There's so much to take into account when we look at the psychological profile of a criminal or someone who's done something like that. How were they raised? What's their actual mental balance like? What activities were they into that led up to this point? What were their social circles like? Sociology, psychology. We have so many studies in place that are still trying to figure these things out. So whenever someone puts on a suit, gets on a pedestal, and says video games are what's leading to all of this happening, they just kind of look really foolish.
Mm-hmm.
I almost wonder if it's sort of just a red herring from people who don't want to create change.
Yeah, I was I was thinking about that while we went on about it, and in English we learn about all the fallacies and everything, and one of the ones we learn about is the straw man, and that's when you attack a random, just irrelevant topic and use that as an argument for a different topic. That's very popular in politics, and that's exactly what this is, because we're talking about video games, but really this scenario comes up in a lot of instances. Like Vic brought up Marilyn Manson earlier, and we do that all the time. Anytime something like this happens, violence comes up. Oh, it's because of video games. Oh, it's because of social media. Whatever the hot thing is now, that's what's causing people to be violent. Because what's really happening is that we can't pin it down, but people need something to fear in media. So it's easier to just say, oh, it's because of this right now. Parents need to start watching this, because if they don't, their kids are going to do something bad.
Yeah, it is so much scarier to say, we're violent as a race. Like,
Can you imagine somebody just goes up like in front, like at a press release, and they're like, "We're just humans, man. It's what we do."
yeah.
I punched somebody out yesterday. Like,
I think another issue, or not an issue, another thing to take into consideration is that I feel like people have been violent, like, as you were saying, for years and years and years and years. And it's like all of a sudden, like, these, like, video games that we haven't had, like, we didn't have in, like, the 1800s, like, this is the reason why. Like, it just doesn't really correlate to, like, violence that we've had all throughout history and time itself. It just doesn't really make sense. And that other part of other places in the world play video games, and other places in the world don't have such big violent issues. So obviously video games can't be, like, the biggest correlation to violence.
yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute, because we kind of broached that, but we never really got into it. Video games are played everywhere, yet I would argue the majority of these kinds of crimes are happening in our country.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that's separating our country from other countries? There are, of course, a lot of different things we can talk about, but the point is that it's not video games.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
I definitely agree.
When I think about some of the other issues that people talk about when they talk about what's happening, one of the bigger ones, for instance, is gun control. And people talk about how our laws when it comes to gun control are one of the things that lead to what's happening in our country. The problem with that, once again, is that there's sides to make on either side for that. People like to talk about countries in Europe that are like, they're really big on that. There are definitely countries over there where people don't have access to firearms unless you're a government official or you are a civil servant, and they don't have a lot of violent acts like that. Mm-hmm. And then I recall not too long ago someone making the opposite argument in a country in the East where they have that happening, but all that happened was that people were knifing each other a lot and people were finding other ways to commit these violent acts. I think what I'm trying to get to is the fact that people keep looking for that easy answer and we just don't have it, but I think we can say it's definitely not because of Mario.
Yeah. It is definitely true that there's a lot of issues at play here, but I personally don't believe that there aren't, like, strides we can make, but those strides aren't blaming it on video games. Those strides are, in my opinion, like gun control.
Yeah, I agree. I think that video games, like, as I was saying earlier, it's such a small part of such a huge issue. There's so many other things we could focus on that we've seen other people in other places of the world, like, do that have made a lot bigger changes than don't play this video game. And I mean, another thing to think about is you blame them on these really violent games like Mortal Kombat or whatever, but I don't know about you guys, but I don't have the same physical capabilities as a lot of the Mortal Kombat characters, so it's not like I can just get these ideas like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, like, do what they did to somebody. Like, I can't do that. That doesn't make sense.
You've never come at your friend with a flying kick?
No. Maybe a flying pillow. Like, I don't know. Like, it just...
And I think something else that's, like, kind of important to note is the fact that, society, a lot of it just deems video games as bad. Just like, growing up, I was always told, like, video games are just a waste of time, and it's just like video games kill your brain cells and all this stuff. And I think we've grown in a society in the sense of, like, we aren't, at least I'm not aware that, like, those kind of things aren't really said that much anymore. Because for me, video games for me have always just kind of been something I did on my free time. It was something to, like, get my mind off of everything else, all my responsibilities and whatnot. and it's just a way to a coping mechanism on how to deal with like, okay, I got all this stuff to do tomorrow. I got 2 hours of free time. I'm just gonna play some Call of Duty and just enjoy this time, And I think that's how it is for a lot of people. Or you get a group of friends over and you have a LAN party. I remember when those were a thing. LAN party is pretty much when you would, for allow use Xbox as an example, when Halo 2 came out. LAN parties were huge when Halo 2 came out. So you'd get like a bunch of people and they would all bring their Xbox over and stuff. And you'd pretty much just, everyone would kind of be in different rooms on different TVs and you'll all be connected to like the same game pretty much. Well, that's multiplayer. LAN parties are more of like the other person's like literally like a few feet away from you or like in a different room.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because there really has been a big shift that we should talk about. Video games are kind of king now. Like, you can make a living as a gamer.
Yeah.
You can stream on Twitch. You can, the studies have shifted. Now it's gone from our video games rotting your brain to, studies have shown that video games improve your hand-eye coordination. And people that play video games are really good problem solvers and all these things. I remember when I was at a bar because I'm over the age of 21 and I was having a drink and I looked up at the TV, and in any bar you look up at the TV, there's sports on, like football or something. There was an esports league match of Overwatch happening.
Really?
In a bar. And I said to myself, we've come so far. We have come so far. Anyway.
Oh my God.
The point is,
You're Googling
it was really interesting to see how far we've come because, like you were just talking about, video games were this thing that it had this negative stigma attached to it. And even as we came up, you think of YouTubers and how they're accumulating this massive wealth nowadays, or at least they were. YouTube's kind of on the decline now, but I digress. But they were accumulating all of this money, and celebrities and actual companies kind of had their nose turned up at them because they still had that stigma of, you guys aren't real like workers, you guys are just getting paid to play video games. And we kind of hit that renaissance, I'd say somewhere in 2012 to 2014, where it was the thing. Like, YouTubers were followed, they were respected. PewDiePie was on South Park. It was a really weird period, and now things have kind of mellowed out and it's just been accepted as what it is. But I'm telling you, when you look at a TV and you see video games are on TV and there's commentators, I'd never seen it before. And there are these commentators and they're just like, the white team's coming in, they're trying to get their hands on the payload and stuff. And it's the weirdest thing in the world, and that's the world we live in now. And let me tell you, after watching that esports league match, I did not go out and kill someone. And I think that's a win for America.
Speaking a little bit more on the progression of video games, do you think, and I don't know, I'm not really kept up to date on those kind of things, but do you think we're going to get to a point to where we have, like, sports, football specifically has fantasy football? Like, are we going to get to the point to where we can now gamble and bet on these weird, like, type of, like, teams? Like, I know Fortnite's doing it. They have all these tournaments, and you can win money by being in the tournament and having, like, a winning team and stuff. So I just think that's funny, like, just comparing the two things. Yeah, we're more technology advanced now. Like, we're more advanced with video games and, like, all that than we were before. But also at the same time, it's just like, yeah, people are making a living off of doing things that as simple as sitting down and, like, playing with the controller,
I would definitely say what you said about people making money and betting on certain things. I would argue that that is already happening in our society because we, like Steven said, we have E3 where there are people who commentate over it like it is football. And I don't know if you guys like that, but to me that was just very odd. Like, it just made something that, like Vic said earlier, like, is a fun thing for me to do when I have into, like, this super serious, like, thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but on, like, Instagram and stuff, I've seen videos of people who have, like, virtual reality, like, headsets on, like, walking around, like, the streets together, and they're, like, doing something in there. Like, I don't, like, people are already taking this and just applying it to real life and making competitions, and, like, it's just what people do now.
It's way off topic, but whatever.
Going on the VR thing, I always was super excited about VR, and I really hope that people stick with it. It seems like, I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, the guy who owns Steam. Well, the company Valve, they're trying to, instead of focusing on Left 4 Dead 3 or, you know, the game they promised, Half-Life 3, they are
A little bit of stank in that sentence.
The tea is spilling.
they're focusing more on like virtual reality. And I always was super excited about virtual reality, and it's for like, I just think there's so many things you could do with it, video game wise, movie wise, just videos in general. But also, I can't wait till we get to like the time where we have the power in a VR headset to just kind of like have this own Sims world, kind of like Ready Player One.
I knew you were gonna bring that.
Yeah, because I always had this, I always had this weird type of argument. Well, I wasn't necessarily an argument, but like proposition to people where it's like, okay, if you could live your everyday life in the real world and just like, you know, have to deal with all the problems and whatnot, or would you just like chill back at your house for the rest of your life on with a VR headset and just have the whole entire world at your disposal and have anything you want?
The first option. Like,
That's
no.
It's funny because that's an ethical quandary we're presented in ethics class. It's called the dream machine, and it's like in the Matrix, where like if you could live your entire life the way you want to with all the experiences you want, but you're not actually living it and you're linked up to a dream machine, would you notice and would you care? And that's one of the questions we're presented with in class, and you have to really think about it. And I was on the side of no, I wouldn't care. I think that a lot of people in our society romanticize the struggle, and we're all about working hard to get what you want, only because you have to. Like the people that are born into wealth and everything, they don't worry about that because they don't have to. So we look at them and we say, you're stuck up, you don't know what it means to earn what you get, only because we have to. So if you were in a position where you didn't have to, you wouldn't value the hard work you have to put into it, and you would link up to the dream machine. We're starting to spiral, so why don't we wrap this thing up?
This has been The Post Point. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and all of our links to our social media are in the description box below. Bye.